Hey there, fellas. This is Miss History coming to you with another bizarre history tidbit. This time we will be talking about medieval divorce. The reality of medieval marriage is more complicated than its general perception as a cold, loveless, one-sided union. Although wives were in the care and under the control of their husbands, there was an expectation that the husbands should be fair to their wives, within cultural constraints. Wives also had the same conjugal rights as their husbands. That is, either spouse could demand sex as part of the marriage contract. Women could even ask for annulments if they claimed their husbands were impotent. But they had to be careful, as prostitutes could be called as expert witnesses to verify this. In certain regions of medieval Europe, judicial combat was sometimes used as a way to solve domestic disputes between husbands and wives. The marital combat rules required special attire. Usually, competing husbands and wives had to wear tight-fitting bodysuits with a hood. Another form of attire for the female participant was a special long chemise with an extended sack-like closed sleeve in which a stone was placed. There are a few written testimonies about such combats. In the year 1200, a man and his wife fought under the sanction of the civic authorities at Basel in Switzerland. In 1228, a woman fought her husband in Bern, Switzerland, and soundly defeated him. German law provided that the man should be armed with 3 wooden clubs. He was to be put up to his waist in a 3-foot-wide hole dug in the ground, with one hand tied behind his back. The woman was to be armed with 3 rocks, each weighing between 1 and 5 pounds, and each one wrapped in cloth in the form of a small sack. The man could not leave his hole, but the woman was free to run around the edge of the pit. If the man touched the edge of the pit with his hand or his arm, he had to surrender one of his clubs to the judges. If the woman hit him with a rock while he was doing so, she had to forfeit one of her stones. Bizarre as it may seem to us today, this marital duel was real. In the early medieval era, for both parties, the penalty for defeat could be death. If the woman won, the man was executed. If the man won, the woman was buried alive. Later, the term seemed to have been softened. This time we'll be focusing on medieval animal court. Way back in medieval times, Europeans put animals that had committed crimes on trial, often providing them with all the same rights as people, including the right to a lawyer and a fair trial. While the punishments seem harsh to us today, keep in mind that the humans were given the exact same treatment as the animals. One of the most bizarre human-animal trends of all recorded history took place in Europe during the Middle Ages. This was the formal prosecution of animals accused of committing crimes against people. Animals charged with such crimes, usually murder, were brought to the court, appointed a lawyer, and tried, just as a person would be. Records show that hundreds of animals were found guilty and then executed in different ways. In the 1994 article, The Laws and Ass, reading E.P. Evans, The Medieval Prosecution and Capital Punishment of Animals, described the practice in detail. The article reviewed books on the subject by several authors, focusing on one written by E.P. Evans in 1906. Evans described 191 animal trials, mostly from the 15th through the 17th centuries. Most of the trials took place in Italy, France, and Germany. There are also a few historical records of trials in other European countries, and in the United States, Canada, and Brazil. The animals were tried for a variety of offenses besides murder, mostly theft and fraud. Records show that many of the animals were tortured for confessions, just as humans were prior to the trial. It is not clear how the animals' confessions were interpreted, considering that the animals do not speak our language. Criminal proceedings against animals were handled with the utmost seriousness by the medieval legal authorities. In the book that Evans had written, he had listed a variety of domestic and wild animals, as well as rodents, sea creatures, birds, and insects, that were tried at various times by the government or church courts. Those that could not be physically brought to court were tried in absentia. In general, only the larger domestic animals, such as pigs, bulls, cows, horses, sheep, and dogs, actually appeared in court, and were subjected to punishments. Some of the animals were found innocent, granted pardons or reprieves by the authorities. Many of the wild animals found guilty by the church courts were excommunicated. The vast majority of criminal defendants were pigs, probably because the farmers allowed them to roam free much of the time. In 1386, a pig accused of murdering an infant was tried and convicted by a court in Falaise, France. The pig that was on trial was hung at the gallows by the village hangman. Her 6 piglets were charged with being accessories to the crime, but were acquitted on the account of their youth and the mother's bad example. A lawyer could establish his reputation by performing well in animal trials. In France, in the early 1500s, a lawyer named Bartholomew Chesinu was appointed to represent some rats that had eaten and destroyed some barley, which was a felony. Chesinu used a series of clever legal maneuvers to delay the trial as long as possible. At one point, he convinced the judge that it was too dangerous for his clients to come to court on the appointed day because of many cats in the neighborhood. Chesinu became famous throughout France for his excellent legal skills. It is unclear why medieval courts went through the trouble to formally try animals before executing them. Some historians believe that these trials were intended to be warnings to animals and people about the consequences of their actions. Others believe the trials represented a philosophical desire to exert some human control over nature. Have you ever danced so hard that you feel like you're going to die the next morning? Do you remember the movie Footloose? Well, in the movie, they banned public dancing because the preacher deemed it dangerous. Well, the first time I heard that, my initial thought was, why would dancing be dangerous? I thought about it for a little while. I didn't think that was truly possible until I heard about this little epidemic that started overseas way back in the 1500s. Possibly even earlier than that. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes? No? Maybe so? Well, if you don't, I'm talking about the 1518 dancing plague. This is where people literally dance themselves to the grave. Yep, it's a real thing that happened, and I will explain the best I can. In July 1518, residents of the city Strasbourg, part of the Holy Roman Empire, were struck by a sudden and seemingly uncontrollable urge to boogie in the streets. The hysteria kicked off when a woman known as Frau Trophea stepped into the street and began to silently twist, twirl, and shake. Her solo dance-a-thon didn't last long before 36 other slap-happy residents joined in the festivities. This party of sorts lasted well over a week. By August, the dancing epidemic had claimed as many as 400 victims. If you are thinking what I was thinking, you'd be saying, but why? Well, with no other explanation for the phenomenon, local physicians blamed it on hot blood and suggested the afflicted simply gyrate their fever away. A simple stage was even constructed, and professional dancers were brought in to help keep it going. The town even hired a band to provide background music for them, but it wasn't long before the marathon started to take its toll. Many of the dancers collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Some even died from strokes and heart attacks. This strange episode didn't end until September, when the dancers were whisked away to a mountaintop shrine to pray for absolution. Yeah, I know, I get it. The dancing plague might sound like something your mom would say to get you to stop wiggling around when you were a kid, but it's actually well documented in the 16th century historical records. It's also not the only known incident of its kind. Similar manias took place in Switzerland, Germany, and Holland, though few were as large or deadly as the one triggered in 1518. What could have led people to dance themselves to death? That's the question I was asking the entire duration of my research, but according to historian John Waller, the explanation most likely concerns Saint Vitus, a Catholic saint who pious 16th century Europeans believed had the power to curse people with a dancing plague. When combined with the horrors of disease and famine, both of which were tearing through Strasbourg in 1518, the Saint Vitus superstition may have triggered a stress-induced hysteria that took hold of much of the city. Other theories have suggested the dancers were members of a religious cult, or even that they had accidentally ingested ergot, a toxic mold that grows on damp rye and produces spasms and hallucinations. Which one do you think it is? If you have another theory, Explain in the comments below. In any case, I hope you had fun exploring the tragedy called the Dancing Plague with me. Thanks for watching. I'm Miss History, signing off.